My billionaire husband broke my leg for slapping his mistress. That is why I called my father, Alexander Barth, the CEO who built empires and buried enemies. Dad, I said, ruin him. Take everything. But let me start from the beginning. Before we continue with the story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. Oh, and drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. We love seeing that. It was October 15th, 3 years to the day since I had married Randy Murdoch. I had flown back from the Seattle Architecture Conference 2 days early. I wanted to surprise him for our anniversary. The pitch had gone better than expected, and I had pictured his face when I walked through the door with champagne and the Patek Philippe watch I had been hiding for months. The first warning came in the foyer. A pair of red-soled Louboutins kicked off carelessly near the entryway table. Size 7. I wore a size 8. Then, a black leather jacket draped over the arm of the living room sofa. Expensive, tailored, definitely not mine. A trail of discarded clothing led toward the master suite, each piece a breadcrumb marking the path to destruction. Maybe Randy hired a new assistant. Maybe one of his investors was staying over. The excuses dissolved with every step I took down that hallway, because deep in my gut, I already knew. From behind the half-open bedroom door came laughter and breathy sighs, a voice that made my stomach drop. Melanie, my sister, the fashion model who had cried on my shoulder 3 months ago about her struggling career, who I had loaned $10,000 to cover her rent. When are you finally going to tell her? Her voice drifted through the crack in the door, playful, shameless. Why rush? Randy's response carried that arrogant drawl I had mistaken for confidence when we first met. Let her play architect for a while. Her whole career exists because I funded it. Without my connections, she would still be sketching condos in some third-rate firm. Something inside me shattered. Not my heart. Something colder, sharper, more permanent. I slammed the door open. The heavy mahogany crashed against the wall, and the sound reverberated through the penthouse like a gunshot. They were tangled in our bed. The custom king-sized bed I had designed myself, with the hand-stitched Belgian linen sheets I had chosen for our second anniversary. Randy's eyes went wide. Melanie did not even bother to cover herself. She just smiled, slow and cruel, like she had been waiting for this moment. Linda, she purred, pushing her hair back from her face. You are home early. I do not remember crossing the room. I only remember the crack of my palm against her face, the sharp sting radiating up my arm, the spray of blood from her nose painting the white sheets crimson. Melanie shrieked, clutching her face. You psycho. Randy lunged off the bed. Are you out of your mind? His fist connected with my ribs, and pain exploded through my chest, stealing my breath. Before I could recover, his hands were on my shoulders. He shoved me backward, hard. My heel caught on the edge of the bedroom runner, and I went flying. The marble staircase rushed up to meet me. My leg twisted at an unnatural angle as I tumbled, bone cracking with a sickening snap that I felt more than heard. My head slammed against the edge of a step, and the world exploded into white-hot agony. When my vision cleared, Randy was standing at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the bedroom light. Melanie appeared beside him, wrapped in my silk robe, blood still dripping from her nose. You shouldn't have done that, Randy said, his voice cold, calculated. He walked down the stairs and grabbed me by my arm, dragging me across the marble floor. Every movement sent lightning bolts of pain through my shattered leg. He threw me into the utility room off the kitchen. The small, windowless space smelled of bleach and metal. The door slammed shut, and I heard the deadbolt slide into place. Stay there until you learn your place, he called through the door. Darkness swallowed me. My leg was on fire, my head pounding, blood trickling down my temple. But my mind was crystal clear. I reached into my blazer pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out the satellite phone my father had given me years ago. You never know when you will need a line no one can trace, he had said. Alexander Barth answered on the first ring. Linda, Dad. My voice came out steady, cold, lethal. I need you to ruin someone. Randy Murdoch. My husband. I want him destroyed. Financially, professionally, personally. I want him to lose everything he has ever touched. Do you understand? Everything. There was a pause. Then my father's voice came through, quiet and deadly. Consider it done. But Randy Murdoch had no idea who he had just made an enemy of. He had no idea that my father did not just build empires. He buried the men who crossed his family. And I was about to become. The elevator hummed its way to the top floor. A soft, expensive sound that usually calmed Linda. Tonight it scraped against her nerves. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored walls. Emerald dress smoothed, hair perfectly waved. The gift for Randy heavy in her bag. 3 years of marriage, she thought. 3 years of building a life in glass and marble above Miami's glittering bay. The penthouse greeted her with silence. No music, no TV, no clink of ice in a glass. Just the low thrum of the air conditioning and the faint scent of his cologne hanging in the air like a warning. She stepped onto the polished marble, her heels clicking too loudly in the cavernous living room. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city burned with color. Inside, everything felt cold. The first crack in the illusion waited on the cream sofa. A designer dress in a size too small for her, black silk spilling over the cushions. A lacy bra lay beside it, one she had never bought. A trail of clothing led toward the hallway, careless and intimate. Each discarded piece landed like a blow. He wouldn't, she told herself. Not Randy, not after everything. From the master suite came a low, breathy laugh. Melanie's laugh. Her sister. The sound froze Linda in place for a heartbeat. Then heat surged up her spine. She moved, one step, then another, until the door to the bedroom was a sliver open, and their voices leaked through. When are you going to tell her? Melanie purred. Relax, Randy said, that lazy arrogance in his tone. She needs me. Without me, she's just another architect begging for a job. Something inside Linda tore cleanly. She shoved the door open. It crashed against the wall. Randy jerked around. Melanie lounged against the pillows, bare, smug, wrapped in Linda's life like it belonged to her. Get out of my bed, Linda said. Melanie smiled. You're early. Linda crossed the room without remembering how, and her palm connected with Melanie's face in a single, savage slap. The crack echoed. Blood bloomed across Melanie's lip. You crazy bitch, Melanie screamed. Randy grabbed Linda's arm, his fingers vice tight. Fury hollowed his eyes. What did you just do? Let go of me. She tried to wrench free. You cheated on me with my sister. He didn't argue. He shoved. Hard. Her heel slipped on the edge of the marble landing. The world tilted, then vanished. She crashed down the staircase, bones and glass and sound. Pain detonated in her leg with a sickening snap. Her head struck stone, and a burst of white swallowed everything. When the world swam back into focus, she lay twisted at the bottom of the stairs. Her leg bent at an impossible angle. A hot, vicious throb pulsing through every breath. Above her, Randy and Melanie stared down, silhouettes against the bedroom light. You did this, Melanie shrieked, clutching her face. Randy descended. Each step measured. He grabbed Linda by the wrist and dragged her across the marble, her broken leg screaming. She bit down on a cry, refusing to give him the satisfaction. He hauled her into the utility room off the kitchen, a narrow, windowless space that smelled of detergent and metal. With a final shove, he sent her sprawling onto the concrete. Stay here, he said, voice flat. Maybe by morning you'll remember your place. The door slammed. The deadbolt slid home. Darkness folded around her, thick and suffocating. For a moment she lay still, feeling the hot spill of blood at her temple, the jagged fire in her leg. Then her mind cleared. With shaking hands, she reached into the inner pocket of her blazer and pulled out the slim, black satellite phone her father had given her years ago. One secure line, untraceable, for emergencies only. This qualified. She pressed the single programmed number. The ring barely sounded once. Linda, Alexander Barth said. Her voice came out low and steady. Dad, it's Randy. He broke my leg and tried to lock me away like trash. She drew in a ragged breath, tasting iron. Ruin him, leave nothing but ash. The dark pressed in on Linda until it felt like another weight on her chest. The utility room hummed softly. Machines idle, pipes ticking somewhere in the walls. Bleach burned her nose. Her broken leg pulsed in ugly, jagged waves, each throb a reminder of the way Randy's hands had felt on her shoulders just before he sent her flying. The satellite phone lay on her stomach. The call ended, her father's last words echoing in the silence. Consider it done, She pictured his face, the stillness in his eyes when he shifted from parent to strategist. Somewhere out there, wheels were already turning, minutes stretched into a distorted ribbon. At some point she heard footsteps in the distance, the muffled thump of bass from the sound system upstairs, a door opening and closing. Randy moving through his kingdom, like nothing had happened. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry. Tears were for women who still believed in apologies. A soft click whispered from the other side of the door. Not the heavy clunk of the deadbolt. Something finer, more precise. Metal, caressed metal, in a pattern that did not belong to Randy. The handle turned. Light sliced into the room as the door opened a few inches. A broad silhouette filled the gap, all in black, the outline of a holster at his side. The familiar, controlled baritone reached her before his face did. "Mrs. Barth Murdoch," Victor said. "Can you move anything besides your arms?" Relief hit her so hard it almost hurt. "My leg's broken," she managed. "Head too, maybe." He slid inside, closing the door behind him until they were wrapped in darkness again, broken only by the soft green glow of a tiny headset in his ear. Night vision goggles rested on his brow. Flipped up, even here, his movements were measured, economical, like every gesture had been rehearsed 1,000 times. "I have you," he said simply. In seconds he assessed the angle of her leg, the blood at her temple, the shallow rise of her chest. He wrapped a compression bandage around her thigh with quick, practiced hands, then secured an inflatable splint over the break, his touch surprisingly gentle. "On 3, Victor warned. "It will hurt, but it will be the last time tonight anyone hurts you without consequence." He slid his arms beneath her shoulders and knees, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Pain tore a raw sound from her, but his grip stayed steady. Outside, the hallway lay empty. The penthouse security panel on the wall blinked a compliant green. "How did you get in?" she whispered. Victor's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "Your father owns the company that built this system. Mr. Murdoch prefers appearances to substance." They moved like shadows. Down the service corridor, through a door Linda had never noticed, into a private elevator that bypassed the main lobby entirely. At the parking level, a black SUV idled with its lights off, another man at the wheel, eyes alert. As the car pulled away, Victor glanced at her in the dim glow of the dashboard. "Mr. Barth requested I ask you one question as soon as we were clear," he said. "Do you want this handled quietly? A clean divorce, generous settlement, or, she rasped, tasting copper and rage, "or do you want him erased?" Victor finished, asset by asset, brick by brick. The city blurred past outside, neon streaking across the windows. Linda thought of the marble staircase, the contempt in Randy's eyes, Melanie's smug smile, of her mother's careful blueprints, the kind of buildings she used to dream of designing. "Erase him," she said. Her voice came out calm, almost serene. "I want his name to mean nothing. I want his empire ground into dust." Victor tapped his earpiece once. "You heard her, sir," he said quietly. Authorization confirmed. The clinic rose from the darkness like something out of a sci-fi rendering, all glass and steel, set back from the road behind layers of discreet security. Inside, everything smelled of antiseptic and money. Nurses waited in a pool of white light, a gurney ready, doctors already gloved. They slid her onto the bed, voices blurring into a controlled chorus of medical terms. As they wheeled her toward a private suite, she saw him through the glass wall of the corridor lounge. Alexander Barth, in a dark suit, hands clasped loosely behind his back, eyes fixed on her with a mix of fury and pride. He stepped into the doorway of her room as the doctors prepared to sedate her. "You did the right thing calling me," he said quietly. "This won't be a divorce," she whispered, fighting the pull of the drugs. "I want a demolition." Her father nodded once, the faintest of acknowledgments, like a contract being signed. "Then we will demolish," he answered. "And when it's over, Linda, there will be nothing left of Randy Murdoch but a cautionary tale." Recovery tasted like antiseptic and metal and the bitter chalk of painkillers dissolving on her tongue. Days blurred into each other, marked by the soft hiss of the IV pump and the slow beeping of monitors that insisted she was still alive. The clinic room was all clean lines and quiet luxury pale wood, floor-to-ceiling glass, a view of the ocean she could barely appreciate. Her leg was encased, her head stitched, her body a map of bruises. The rage, though, stayed sharp. Her father came and went, like a controlled storm. Bringing doctors, lawyers, folders, he talked to her in calm, measured tones about recovery timelines and legal strategies. But beneath every word she heard the unspoken promise. This is already in motion. At night, when the corridor lights dimmed, Victor appeared in the doorway with updates spoken in low, precise sentences. Accounts frozen here. Inquiries launched there. Quiet calls made to men who owed Alexander Barth favors. On the fourth afternoon, Randy arrived. She knew the second the elevator opened on her floor. His cologne crept under the door ahead of him. Mixing with the sterile air, Linda lay back against the pillows, face composed, phone on the bedside table, its screen dark, the recording app already armed. She had asked the nurse to leave them alone. Victims needed privacy. Strategists needed silence. Randy stepped inside, eyes red-rimmed, suit slightly rumpled, the picture of a man tormented by guilt. "Linda," he breathed, crossing to the bed. "God, look at you." She watched him without speaking, letting the quiet stretch. "I was out of my mind that night," he rushed on. "Melanie pushed me. She kept saying things, and you hit her, and I just snapped. I would never hurt you on purpose. You know that, right?" The device on the table captured every word. He pulled a chair closer, leaning in, hands clasped like a penitent. He blamed the stress of the market, the pressure of investors, the alcohol Melanie had poured too freely. He painted himself as a man cornered by circumstance and seduced by a manipulative woman. He never once said, "I am the one who threw you down the stairs." He only said, "It all got out of hand. I will fix this," he promised. "We'll settle everything quietly. I'll transfer you properties, cash, whatever you need. We just need to show a united front. The press can't get wind of this. Not with the tower project about to close." His eyes flicked, almost reflexively, to the folder on her side table, labeled with the clinic's logo. Numbers mattered more than stitches. Linda let her gaze soften, allowed a tremor into her voice. "You would really do that?" she asked. "Start over? Just us?" Relief flooded his features. "Of course, you and me, like before. I'll cut Melanie off. She means nothing." Liar, she thought, watching the tiny twitch in his jaw when he said her sister's name. The flaw in the foundation wasn't the affair. It was his belief that everyone around him was a piece on his board. When he finally left, after kissing her forehead a little too carefully for someone so overcome, Linda picked up the phone and stopped the recording. 42 minutes of confession, deflection, and fear. It would be useful. The remaining days she spent less as a patient and more as an analyst. Victor brought her devices loaded with open-source data, filings, public records. She traced the outlines of Murdoch Industries subsidiaries fanning out like cracks in concrete, shell entities nested inside one another, valuations that did not quite add up. Every time she found an inconsistency, she marked it, building her own blueprint of his empire. When the doctors finally cleared her for discharge, a wheelchair waited by the door, sleek and custom-adjusted. Her father kissed her temple, his touch uncharacteristically gentle. "Remember," he said, "you don't owe him honesty anymore, only results." Randy insisted on sending his own car. He met her at the penthouse entrance with flowers and cameras tucked far enough away to look accidental. Linda smiled for them, let her hand rest lightly on his arm, eyes shining with what anyone would call forgiveness. "Let's get you home," he said. Home. The word tasted different now. Inside, the penthouse had been scrubbed of visible sin. No stray clothing, no broken glass, just fresh flowers and a new throw over the sofa, as if redecorating could erase what had happened on those stairs. Randy showed her the upgrades he'd made to make things easier for her recovery: a new ergonomic chair in his office, a second monitor on his massive desk. "For you," he said. "So you can work from here. Shared access to everything. We're a team, remember?" He guided her into the leather chair, fingers brushing her shoulders, unaware of the way her stomach coiled. The screen in front of her blinked to life, his network opening with a password he typed too quickly, assuming her disinterest. "That's our shared drive," he said. "Use whatever you need." She watched the directories populate, Offshore entities, project projections, investor lists, layers upon layers of carefully curated lies. Linda smiled up at him, the picture of a grateful, wounded wife trying to rebuild her life. "Thank you, Randy," she said softly. "I just want to understand your world better." As he walked away, already checking his phone, she slid a small encrypted drive into the side of the terminal, the faintest click lost under the hum of the city outside. On the screen, file trees began to mirror themselves, line by line, like cracks spreading through stone. By the third week back in the penthouse, Linda had learned that pain could become background noise. The cast, the cane, the occasional spike when she moved wrong. Those were just textures in the room now, like the hum of the air conditioning or the distant swell of traffic below. She spent most of her days in Randy's home office, framed by glass and sky, a silent figure in an emerald dress seated at the edge of his empire. On the screen, his shared drive unfolded like a blueprint. Folders stacked in tidy grids, project names stamped across them with confident arrogance. Bayshore, Coral Rise, Silver Key. To anyone else, it looked organized. To an architect's eye, it looked like a facade. Patterns repeated where they shouldn't. Gaps appeared where load-bearing supports should be. Numbers sat on the page the way a badly placed column sat in a lobby wrong, even before you could explain why. She built her own overlays the way she would sketch revisions on tracing paper. One layer for titled entities, another for subsidiaries, another for offshore banks and jurisdictions Randy had once mocked as, for idiots who don't know real loopholes. Each time she aligned them, new misalignments emerged. Funds routed through companies with no staff, invoices from contractors that did not exist, valuations that ballooned only when a certain lawyer's name appeared. The real breakthrough hid in an innocuous folder labeled Archive, Plans. Inside were scans of building schematics, soil reports, zoning variances. It was familiar territory, the language of her old life, but as she studied them, she noticed inconsistencies. Projects approved with densities the land could not support. Environmental reports subtly altered. Signatures copied from older documents and pasted into new ones. It was architectural forgery used as financial scaffolding. The hidden caches weren't locked behind obvious passwords. They were embedded in the drawings themselves, as metadata and encoded layers. Whoever set them up assumed no one would notice that a mechanical plan had an extra, invisible, room assigned to it. Linda noticed. She isolated the invisible layers, extracted the embedded code, and followed it to encrypted spreadsheets buried in dummy directories. When the final set of numbers opened, she sat back, heart steady. The fraud wasn't sloppy, it was elegant. Shell companies bought land from other shell companies at inflated prices, all of them leading back, through enough turns, to Randy. Investors were being sold skyscrapers built on sand. She did not call her father, not yet. This part needed a different kind of leverage. The introduction to Michael Chen came via a charity committee email neutral ground. On paper, he was just another rival developer. Clean balance sheets, a reputation for caution, that made Randy call him boring. After a few drinks, in person, when Linda met him in a quiet corner of a Brickell hotel bar, he reminded her of the first time she had seen a perfectly balanced structure. No wasted lines, no theatrical gestures, just strength where it mattered. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, sliding into the leather booth opposite him, her cane resting against the seat. "I know you're busy. I make time when someone like you asks," Michael replied. His gaze flicked briefly to her cast, then back to her face, without the pity she had come to resent in others. "Your father speaks highly of your work." That was new. She filed it away. She set a slim tablet on the table between them, screen dark, fingers resting lightly on the edge. "I'm not here as my father's daughter," she said. "I'm here as Randy Murdoch's wife." Soon-to-be ex-wife, an eyebrow lifted, almost imperceptibly. "I see. I need a partner who understands what happens when a structure fails," she continued. "Someone who knows how to take over the site without letting the whole block collapse." She tapped the screen. A curated selection of files appeared, only a fraction of what she had uncovered, carefully chosen. One falsified environmental report. One chain of shell transfers, One project whose projected returns were impossible unless reality bent to Randy's spreadsheets. Michael studied the documents, his expression barely shifting, but she saw the moment he recognized the scale. His fingers tightened once around his glass before he set it down. "These are serious accusations," he said quietly. "If they're true, Murdoch Industries is standing on a sinkhole." "They're true," Linda answered. "And what you're seeing is just the hairline crack in the surface." He looked at her for a long beat, weighing something. "What do you want from me, Miss Barth?" She leaned in, the city lights painting shifting patterns across the table. "I want to redraw the skyline," she said. "But first, I need help bringing down the man who built it wrong. I have the blueprints to his fraud. You have the credibility and the strategic reach to turn that into a controlled demolition." A slow, measured nod. "You realize there's no going back from this once we start." "There wasn't any going back," she said, "the moment he pushed me down those stairs." Michael exhaled, decision settling over his features like a final beam laid into place. He turned the tablet toward himself, paging through the files with new intent. "Then let's begin," he said. The chandelier light caught the crystals in Linda's cane with every step, scattering fractured rainbows across the marble as she entered the ballroom. Conversations dipped, then sharpened, attention narrowing like a camera lens. The Murdoch Industries' annual hope, horizons, gala white lilies, champagne towers, a string quartet drowning under the murmur of money. This year's theme was Foundations of the Future. The irony tasted sweet on her tongue. Her gown was a deep, architectural green, cut clean along the lines of her body, the slit calibrated to show just enough of the cast beneath. The scar along her temple had faded to a pale line, a deliberate refusal to hide the damage. Heads turned as she moved through the crowd on Michael Chen's arm, the quiet power of his presence framing her, not overshadowing her. People who had sent flowers and carefully worded texts now stared, calculating. Near the stage, Randy held court in a tailored tuxedo, laughter a little too loud, drink held a little too tightly. When he saw her, his smile faltered, then snapped back into place, polished and camera-ready. He crossed the room with open arms, the perfect contrite husband. "Linda," he said, kissing her cheek for the benefit of the photographers circling like sharks. "You look incredible. Everyone's been dying to see you." She let her lips curve, careful and cool. "I wouldn't miss such an important night for you," she replied, fingers resting lightly on his sleeve. The picture of reconciliation. Flashbulbs popped. Somewhere behind them, Michael drifted into the cluster of investors, already seeding quiet doubts about overextended projects. Subtle pressure on weak beams. Randy guided her toward the stage. "We thought it would be meaningful if you said a few words before the auction," he murmured. "Talk about resilience, second chances. The board loves that kind of narrative." "I'd be honored," she said. When the MC called her name, the room applauded politely. Linda climbed the few steps to the podium at a measured pace, cane ticking against the risers, every tap a metronome counting down. She stood beneath the chandelier, the sea of faces glimmering below her: bankers, politicians, influencers, all of them with something tied to Murdoch Industries. "Thank you," she began, her voice carrying easily. "Tonight is about foundations, the ones we build, the ones we pretend are stronger than they are, the ones that crack when no one is looking." A ripple of unease moved through the front tables. Randy shifted, a small warning smile fixed on his face, as if he could steer her with sheer will. "I was asked to dedicate this evening to resilience," Linda continued, "to surviving hardship. I thought the best way to do that would be to show you what kind of man stands behind the Murdoch name you've all invested in." She pressed a button on the small remote hidden against the podium. The house lights dimmed. The massive screens flanking the stage flickered, the gala logo vanishing, replaced by grainy footage from a security camera at the top of a marble staircase. The room went very still. On screen, a woman in an emerald dress burst through a bedroom door. A naked man and a dark-haired woman recoiled under the sudden light. Voices crackled accusation, mockery, the sharp sound of a slap. Gasps echoed through the ballroom as the man on the screen lunged, as his hands struck, as his wife tumbled down the stairs in a sickening blur. Someone whispered, "Is that?" "Mute the video," Randy hissed at a technician. But Victor, positioned by the AV booth in a black suit, simply folded his arms. The footage cut to close-ups. The X-ray of a shattered leg, hospital records, time-stamped photos of bruises, then overlays clean graphics. Linda had designed herself, mapping money transfers from charity accounts to shell corporations, project funds rerouted into private holdings. Names of well-known investors appeared beside quietly damning figures. "Stop this," Randy shouted, taking a step toward the stage. Several phones lifted, recording. On screen, a final clip played. Randy in the clinic chair beside her bed, his voice clear and unmistakable as he blamed Melanie, as he fretted over bad press, as he promised to move assets before anyone starts digging. The audio was crisp enough that even the servers paused, trays suspended mid-air. The video faded on a still image. Linda, at the bottom of the stairs, motionless, blood threading across the marble like a fault line. Silence crashed over the room. Linda let it sit there, heavy and undeniable. Then she looked out over the sea of stunned faces, letting her gaze pass deliberately over each table, landing last on Randy, whose complexion had gone the color of old plaster. "This," she said softly into the microphone, "is what your foundations are built on." In the back, someone stood up and walked out. At the investors' table, two men leaned toward each other, already whispering. Phones buzzed, board members paled, and the first hairline fractures spread through Randy Murdoch's carefully curated world. The conference room sat at the very top of Barth Global's headquarters, a glass box suspended above the city. At night, it felt like hovering inside a storm cloud. Lightning flickered on the horizon, distant and soundless, throwing brief flashes across the polished table between Linda and her father. Alexander had dismissed everyone else. No assistants, no lawyers, not even Victor. Just the two of them and a thick folder resting in front of him, its edges perfectly aligned with the grain of the wood. Linda's cane leaned against her chair, her cast visible beneath the hem of her tailored dress. The public fallout from the gala had been brutal. The headlines still pulsed in her phone. Yet here, the noise of the world might as well have been on another planet. "You did well," Alexander said at last, studying her face. "The gala was efficient." "Not efficient enough," she replied. "He's bleeding, but he's not finished." A flicker of something, pride, maybe regret, passed through his eyes. He tapped the folder once with his fingertips. "There is a reason I haven't pushed for complete annihilation yet," he said. "Before we go further, you need the whole picture." He slid the folder across to her. The weight of it felt wrong immediately. Heavier than paper should be. Inside, neatly organized, were blueprints, photographs, old newspaper clippings. At the top lay a picture Linda hadn't seen in years. Her mother in a yellow hard hat, laughing at something off camera. The skeleton of a building rising behind her. "Your mother's last project," Alexander said quietly. "You remember what you were told?" Linda's throat tightened. That the financing collapsed. That safety corners were cut by some local contractor. That the site accident was random. The word tasted false as she spoke it. It was not random. His voice turned flat, the way it did in boardrooms before he dismantled someone. The contractor did not act alone. He acted on instruction. He pulled out a set of emails, printed, names and timestamps, stark against the white. Cornelius Murdoch, Irene Valdez, Melanie's mother's maiden name. Legal entities she recognized now from Randy's files. The dates lined up with the months before her mother's accident. "They were bidding against your mother for a federal sustainable housing contract," Alexander continued. "Her design was better, cheaper in the long term, unbribable. So they chose another route. They undermined the site, delayed steel deliveries, pushed for cheaper materials, paid the inspector to look the other way." Linda stared at the structural diagrams. The red circles marking load-bearing columns. The faint notes in her mother's handwriting questioning the sudden changes. Her chest felt hollow, as if someone had carved out all the air. "You knew?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "Not then," Alexander answered. "By the time I traced the threads, it was too late to save her. All I could do was make sure the story never reached you until you were strong enough to hold it without breaking. Randy's father was part of this," she said slowly, fingers tightening around the blueprint edges. "And Melanie's family. Yes. He held her gaze. The Murdochs profited. The Valdez family gained contracts for decades. Your mother's death cleared their path. That tower they like to put on their brochures. It stands on what should have been hers. Memories rearranged themselves in her mind, the hushed arguments she'd overheard as a teenager. The way her father had gone to war and business after the funeral. The sharp caution in his eyes when she first mentioned Randy years ago. You tried to warn me, she realized. I tried not to control you, he corrected. I failed at both. The room seemed to tilt. Her campaign against Randy, the meticulous digging, the gala, it all suddenly felt small, like she'd been attacking a single cracked tile while rot ate the whole foundation beneath her family. This isn't just about what he did to you last month, Alexander said softly. It is about what his bloodline did to your mother, to our name. They have been feeding on what should have been yours for years. Linda looked back down at her mother's smiling face. The hard hat sat slightly crooked, as if she'd jammed it on in a hurry between solving a crisis and checking on her crew. She remembered the way her mother had talked about buildings like they were promises, not trophies. Randy's empire was built with the same tools, Linda said. Sabotage. Bribery. Shortcuts. He's just the most polished symptom. Yes, Alexander agreed. And now you have a choice. You can end this at the marital level, alimony, headlines, eventual obscurity, or you can finish what your mother didn't get the chance to. You can take back everything they stole and salt the earth where their name used to stand. Outside the glass, thunder finally rolled in, a low, distant growl. The city lights flickered faintly and steadied again. Linda closed the folder carefully, aligning its edges the way he had. Her hands had stopped shaking. The anger in her chest stretched, reshaped itself into something colder, older, threaded through with grief. This stopped being about just Randy the moment he touched me, she said. Now I know he was already standing on my mother's grave when he said his vows. She lifted her gaze to her father's, eyes clear. This isn't revenge anymore. It's restitution. Alexander nodded once, as if some long-pending verdict had finally been delivered. Then we proceed on that basis, he said. Not to hurt him, to erase the Murdoch legacy and reclaim what is ours. Linda stood, cane steady beneath her hand, and looked out over the city her mother had dreamed of shaping. Every tower, every bridge, every lit window became a ledger entry waiting to be corrected. Randy Murdoch is no longer my problem, she said quietly. He's my mother's unfinished business, and I intend to finish it. The Murdoch Industries boardroom had been designed to intimidate. Dark wood paneling, a table the size of a yacht, a wall of glass overlooking Miami's skyline like a private kingdom. Today, it felt smaller, overcrowded. The air thick with cologne, tension, and the sour tang of fear that no one wanted to acknowledge. At the head of the table, Randy tried to project the same easy dominance he'd always worn, but there was a crack at the edges now, a tightness around his eyes. The fallout from the gala had shattered the illusion of invincibility. Stock had dipped, journalists were circling. Regulators had started asking questions that wouldn't go away. This is a witch hunt, he snapped, slapping a folder shut. Some overzealous auditor and a bitter estranged wife do not constitute proof. Linda sat halfway down the table, flanked on one side by Michael Chen, on the other by a quiet attorney from Barth Global, who had said almost nothing since they arrived. Her cane rested beside her chair, her posture relaxed, as if this were just another design review. In front of her, a slim laptop glowed, connected to the main screen on the far wall. We're a bit past the witch hunt stage, Michael said mildly. The SEC tends to get cranky when charity funds end up in private accounts. Murmurs rippled around the table. Several board members avoided Randy's gaze. The chairman cleared his throat. Mrs. Barth Murdoch, you requested this emergency meeting. You claimed to have information the board must see before the market opens tomorrow. I did. Linda clicked a key. The screen filled with a flowchart of entities, boxes and lines, spiderwebbing out from the Murdoch logo in the center. To Linda, it looked like a structural diagram of a building, seconds before collapse. These are your subsidiaries, she said calmly, the ones listed in your annual reports. And these, another click, more boxes blooming in red, are the entities you failed to disclose. Shell companies used to move money between projects, inflate valuations, and hide losses. She moved through the evidence with an architect's precision. Emails authorizing temporary reallocations of investor funds, fake invoices from non-existent contractors, cross-referenced timestamps showing money leaving a charitable foundation the same day. Randy's personal accounts swelled. For each claim, a document. For each document, a signature or a voice. On the screen, a familiar clinic recording played for a few seconds. Randy's voice, casual, dismissive, talking about moving assets. Before anyone starts digging. No screaming, no context, just quiet intent. "Stop playing that," he barked, color rising in his neck. "This is illegal." "She stole confidential information from my personal network." "Our network," Linda corrected. "And no, what's illegal is what you did with other people's money." The attorney finally spoke, voice dry. "The forensic team, retained by Mr. Barth, has independently verified these materials. Several regulators have been notified in advance of this meeting. The question is not whether this happened. It is how this board chooses to respond." Silence slammed down like a gavel. The chairman looked older than he had an hour ago. "You're asking us to..." "What?" "Exactly." Linda folded her hands. "To remove Randy Murdoch from all executive roles, effective immediately. To appoint an interim leadership slate acceptable to the creditors and regulators, and to cooperate fully with any investigations, starting today." Randy laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You don't have that kind of leverage." Linda slid a document across the table. "My shares," she said, "plus the blocks acquired in the open market over the last quarter by Barth Global and Chen Holdings. Together, that gives us controlling interest." Eyes widened around the table as numbers landed. A few cell phones lit under the table, frantic messages flying. Michael's tone stayed almost gentle. "You've known for weeks someone was buying up your float," he said to Randy. "You just assumed it was a hedge fund looking for a quick flip." "You can't do this," Randy growled, turning back to Linda. "You're my wife." "No," she said softly. "I'm your consequence." The vote was brutal in its simplicity. One by one, hands rose. Some shook, some didn't. A few remained stubbornly down. But it didn't matter. The count cleared the threshold with room to spare. "Effective immediately," the chairman said, not quite meeting Randy's eyes. "You are removed as CEO and from all managerial duties pending the outcome of the investigations." Security, previously invisible at the periphery, stepped a fraction closer. The meeting dissolved into controlled chaos. Lawyers clustered. Directors whispered. Someone from PR hovered in the doorway, already drafting statements in their head. Linda closed her laptop, slipped it into her bag, and rose, her cane clicking once against the floor. Randy caught up with her in the corridor outside, the boardroom door swinging shut behind them. "You think this is over?" he hissed, fingers clamping around her upper arm. The charming public face was gone. What remained was raw and ugly. "You think you can humiliate me and just walk away?" Pain flared where he gripped. But she didn't flinch. "Take your hand off me," he squeezed harder. "You're nothing without my name. You and your crippled little..." The sentence cut off in a strangled grunt as his wrist was suddenly no longer on her arm but twisted behind his back. Victor had appeared from nowhere, movement so fast it barely registered. He pinned Randy against the wall with one forearm, voice low enough that only the three of them heard. "Mr. Barth instructed that Mrs. Barth Murdoch is not to be touched again," he said. "By anyone." Randy tried to jerk free. Victor tightened the hold a fraction. The message was not in the force but in the ease with which he applied it. "I could press charges for this," Randy spat. "You should add it to the list," Victor replied calmly. He released him with a small shove. Randy stumbled, catching himself on a console table, eyes burning. Linda met Randy's glare for a steady beat. "Careful on the stairs," she said, then turned and walked away, the tap of her cane a metronome down the corridor. Later that night, the war left the boardroom and returned to the streets. Linda sat in the back of a sedan, city lights streaking past the windows as Victor drove, and another car from Barth. Security followed at a discreet distance. The traffic was light, the road ahead clear until it wasn't. Headlights flared in the rearview mirror, too bright, too close. A black SUV swerved into their lane, engine roaring as it accelerated toward them with the sick, reckless intent of a battering ram. "Hold on," Victor said, voice suddenly sharp. Time narrowed. The SUV lunged forward, but Victor had already cut hard to the right, tires screaming as their sedan slipped into the narrow gap between a barrier and an exit ramp. Metal grazed concrete, a shower of sparks flaring outside Linda's window. The SUV shot past, missing them by inches, before fishtailing and vanishing down the highway. Heart pounding, Linda clutched the armrest, breath sawing in and out. Behind them, the security escort braked, then swerved to block any follow-up. Victor eased the car back into the lane, face composed but eyes burning in the mirror. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She forced her fingers to uncurl. "No," he nodded once. "That was not an accident." "No," Linda agreed, pulse slowly steadying. She gazed out at the skyline. Towers etched against the dark like teeth. "Good. It means he's finally as desperate as he should be." The city flowed past, unaware that a dynasty had just been knocked off its axis and that the woman in the back seat had no intention of stopping at a simple fall. The bankruptcy hearing took place in a federal courtroom that smelled of dust, old wood, and the faint ozone of too many electronics. Gone were the chandeliers and string quartets. Here, the light was flat, unforgiving, fluorescent. Rows of reporters packed the benches, tablets ready. Lenses trained on the front where the remnants of Murdoch Industries were being dismantled in carefully phrased legal language. Randy sat at the debtor's table, a navy suit hanging looser on his frame than it had a month ago. The swagger was gone. His hair, once meticulously styled, looked like it had been combed with his fingers on the way in. He stared straight ahead as counsel detailed asset dispersals, creditor priorities, the sale of flagship properties to consortiums that did not include his name. Linda watched from the opposite side, beside Michael and a cluster of attorneys who now represented the restructuring entity. Her cane rested within reach. She didn't need it as much anymore, but the ache in her leg on stormy days reminded her why she was here. The judge's voice droned on, reciting docket numbers, approving agreements hammered out in long nights she'd spent dissecting balance sheets like autopsy reports. When the final plan was nearly approved, her attorney rose. "Your Honor, there is one additional matter relevant to the integrity of this proceeding and to the court's understanding of how this enterprise was constructed." The judge looked over his glasses. "Briefly, counsel," Linda stood. "With the court's permission, I'd like to enter supplemental exhibits demonstrating that Murdoch Industries' leadership relied not only on fraud in its operations, but on fraud at its core." A murmur rippled through the room. Randy's head jerked toward her, eyes narrowing. She approached the display monitor as a series of documents appeared. Trust agreements, old insurance policies, a family charter outlining inheritance terms. Highlighted clauses made the point clear. Succession rights tied explicitly to direct blood issue. "For decades," Linda said, voice steady, "the Murdoch family held itself out as a dynasty. Investments, loans, political favors. Many were extended on the belief that this company would remain in the hands of a legitimate heir." She tapped the remote. New images appeared. A lab letterhead, DNA profiles, chain of custody forms, independent genetic testing, conducted under court supervision as part of a separate civil matter, has established that Randall Murdoch is not the biological son of Cornelius Murdoch, she continued. He is the child of a longtime associate whose identity is under protective seal. The trust documents show repeated amendments taking great pains to maintain the illusion of a bloodline. Another exhibit, a series of emails and recorded calls between Cornelius and Irene Valdez, Melanie's mother. Carefully redacted names, unredacted intent. "Years ago," Linda said, when it became clear that the original succession plan was vulnerable, Cornelius Murdoch devised a workaround. If he could not pass his empire to his own blood, he would bind it to someone whose loyalty and leverage he could control. He encouraged a relationship between his designated heir and the daughter of his co-conspirator in my mother's destruction. On screen, snippets of conversation played. Cornelius pushing for a union that cements both families. Irene promising her daughter would keep him on a short leash. References to trust clauses and inheritance triggers tied to marriage and future children. The affair with Melanie was not an accident. Linda said. It was an engineered contingency. When Randy believed he was cheating on his wife with my sister, he was, in fact, stepping into the exact trap his father had designed to secure an heir who actually qualified for the fortune Randall was parading around as his birthright. Randy lurched to his feet. "You're lying," he rasped. "This is fabricated. I am his son. He told me." "Sit down, Mr. Murdoch," the judge snapped. Randy ignored him, staggering a step toward Linda. "He chose me. He built all of this for me." Her attorney wordlessly passed another document to the clerk. The judge skimmed it, eyes tightening. "The court has already reviewed these findings under seal," he said. "The testing is conclusive. Whatever emotional weight this carries, it does not alter today's financial orders, but it does clarify the misrepresentations made to investors." The words seemed to hit Randy one at a time. Not his son. Misrepresentation. Conclusive. He swayed, bracing a hand on the table. The last fragments of performance slipped away, leaving a man stripped of even the stories he'd told himself. "You knew," he whispered, staring at the empty space where his father should have been. "All this time, you knew." No one answered. The courtroom had no room for ghosts. When the judge's gavel finally came down, approving the reorganization plan and effectively ending Murdoch Industries as it had existed, the silence was punctured by a crackle of typing and the soft clatter of people rising to leave. Reporters surged toward the hallway outside, forming a living corridor of microphones and cameras. Linda stepped out into the flash storm, Michael just behind her, Victor a quiet shadow at the edge of her vision. The courthouse steps felt strangely solid under her healed leg. "Miss Barth," a reporter called. "What happens now that you control the remaining core assets? Is this just a rebranding of the same machine?" She paused at the row of microphones, the city humming beyond the barricades. Behind her, somewhere inside, Randy was being guided through a side exit, away from the cameras, toward a life suddenly without a last name that opened doors. "The entity that filed today is finished," Linda said, voice carrying over the crowd. "The fraud is being unwound. The victims, investors, employees, communities promised buildings that were never going to be safe will be compensated as fully as the law allows." "And you?" another reporter shouted. "What will you build from what's left?" She let the question hang for a beat. "The remaining viable assets will be folded into a new company, jointly led by Barth Global and Chen Holdings," she answered. "It's called the Barth Chen Group. Our mandate is simple: transparent books, ethical construction, and projects that can stand both structurally and morally." Flashes strobed. "Is this about revenge?" someone asked. Linda thought of her mother's hard hat, of the marble stairs, of the SUV's headlights bearing down on her, of Randy in that courtroom, realizing the dynasty he'd clung to had never truly been his. "It started that way," she said. "But revenge ends when the person who hurt you has nothing left to lose. Justice keeps going until the damage is repaired." She stepped back from the microphones as more questions erupted. None of them she cared to answer. The skyline rose behind the courthouse, jagged and luminous. For the first time, she felt like it was no longer a monument to what had been stolen from her family, but a blueprint she finally held the rights to redraw. The render glowed on the screen at the front of the room, sunlight spilling over brick and glass, trees threading through courtyards, rooftop gardens layered like terraces in some quiet green canyon. No marble staircases, no dramatic flourishes, just clean lines, honest materials, and balconies deep enough for real chairs instead of just photographs. "This is phase 1 of the Liberty Harbor project," Linda said, laser pointer steady in her hand. 480 units of mixed-income housing, net zero energy, built on land that used to be a waste of parking lots and broken promises. The audience wasn't investors in tuxedos anymore. City officials, community organizers, young architects, a few skeptical journalists, people who wanted metrics, not magic tricks. Behind them, the logo of the Barth Chen Group was projected in simple black and green. No family crests, no scripted legacy. She walked them through the numbers: transparent budgets, capped executive salaries tied to project outcomes, open-source data on materials and emissions. Questions came, sharp and practical. She answered each one without flinching, because for once there was nothing she needed to hide. Afterward, As the crowd thinned and the models were surrounded by people touching the tiny trees and peering at miniature windows, Alexander watched from a chair near the back, a blanket over his knees despite the Miami heat. The illness had crept in quietly, the way bad design sometimes did, small at first, then suddenly everywhere. His eyes, though, were clear. "You didn't even look at your notes," he remarked when she joined him. "I wrote the notes," she said. "And the plan. Harder to forget something you built yourself." He smiled, the rare, unarmored version that belonged only to her and a handful of childhood memories. "Your mother would have liked this project," he said. "She always wanted trees where people thought only concrete belonged." The words hit her with a gentler force than they might have a year ago. "I know," she answered. "That's why the central courtyard has her footprint dimensions. Every building's aligned to the sun the way she used to do it." He looked back at the render, eyes shining just a little too brightly. "You've done it, Linda," he said quietly. "Not just the ruin, the rebuilding. That was always the harder part." She took his hand, feeling the bones sharper than they used to be. "Rest," she told him. "I'll take it from here." He died 3 weeks later in his own bed, the city lights outside the window and Victor sitting watch in the hall. When the call came, Linda didn't shatter. Grief moved through her like a tide, deep and steady. But it did not drag her under. He had seen what she became. That was an ending that felt, if not fair, then at least complete. Months folded into each other, measured by site visits and planning meetings, by steel rising where lies had once stood. Michael became a constant presence, sometimes as a partner arguing over line items, sometimes as the man who brought her coffee at midnight when she was too deep in a model to notice the hour. On the evening the city council unanimously approved Liberty Harbor, they stood on the terrace of her office. The bay stretched out like a sheet of dark glass below them. The air smelled of salt and rain, the storm clouds holding their breath offshore. "You know," Michael said, leaning on the railing beside her, "most people would take a vacation after dismantling a dynasty and rebuilding a corporation from the studs. Most people didn't let their husband throw them down the stairs," she replied. "My threshold for exhaustion is different." He huffed a laugh, then reached into his jacket. When he turned back to her, the joking edge was gone. "I'm not asking because of what we've built on paper," he said. "I'm asking because of the way you look at buildings like they're promises and then actually keep them. Because you scare me in exactly the right ways. Because somewhere between forensic audits and zoning hearings, you became the person I measure my days against." He opened the small box between them. The ring was simple, no ostentatious stone, just a band of platinum with a fine, engraved line running around it like a horizon. "Linda Barth," he said. "Will you marry me?" The old Linda might have thought about public perception, shareholder confidence, strategic alliances. The woman who had watched empires fall and chosen to build anyway just thought about mornings that didn't hurt and nights that didn't feel like warfare. "Yes," she said, the words settling in her chest like a beam finding its place. "On one condition." His eyebrows lifted. "Which is, we keep the prenup written in concrete," she said. "And in it, we both promise never to weaponize a staircase." He laughed, the sound bright against the dark water, and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit like something designed, not guessed. They married in a small ceremony on a rooftop garden still half under construction, surrounded by potted saplings that would one day shade families who didn't know the name Murdoch at all. Victor stood with the handful of guests, expression almost soft. A chair at the front held her mother's old hard hat and her father's cufflinks, catching the sun. Later, on their honeymoon, they stood on a balcony in another city, another skyline etched against the dusk. Linda traced the shapes of buildings with her gaze, noting where shadows pooled, where glass reflected more than it revealed. "You're cataloging again," Michael murmured, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Always," she said. "I'm thinking about what I'd change." And she leaned back into him, the old ache in her leg now just a memory, not a wound. Less vanity towers, she decided, more places people can actually live without feeling like the floor is going to drop out from under them. Below, the city pulsed with light, unaware of the woman on the balcony who had once turned her own collapse into a blueprint. For the first time in longer than she could remember, her chest felt unclenched, her mind not scanning for danger but for possibilities. Linda rested her hand over Michael's, the ring cool against his skin, and smiled at the skyline she was already quietly redrawing. Let's build something clean, she said. For once, from the ground all the way up. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.